Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Arab summit marks milestone for Baghdad as leaders remain divided. International Labour Organization calls on Bahrain to reinstate all sect workers. And Egypt's al-Ahly fans demand justice for the Port Said victims. Mosaic, world news from the Middle East, begins now.
بدأت في بغداد أعمال القمة العربية 23.
The 23rd Arab Summit opened in Baghdad today. In attendance are the leaders of 9 countries, in addition to Iraq, which is hosting the Arab Summit for the first time in 22 years. Iraqi leaders received the rotating presidency from Libya. The last Arab Summit was held in Sirte during the former regime's reign. Syria is absent from the Baghdad Summit due to the suspension of its participation in official Arab functions. However, the Syrian issue is on the summit's agenda, but there is no demand for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's resignation.
Putting an immediate end to the violence in Syria, settling Arab conflicts through peaceful means and within an Arab framework, and supporting the mission of Kofi Annan, these were the most important topics of the Baghdad summit. Some believe this outcome to be insufficient and a mere repetition of the repugnant rhetoric of regimes overthrown by the Arab people.
Our Arab summit in Baghdad delegates us with a historic mission in light of the political developments in our Arab region and their consequences. As Arab countries, we should create an appropriate environment for dialogue in order to avoid violence, chaos, and foreign interference.
The Arab League believes convening the summit at this time and place, and under such circumstances, to be the most important event, regardless of the outcome. For its part, Iraq, through many of its official spokesmen, tried to reassure that its presidency of the Arab League this year will not come at the expense of the Syrian people. However, these assurances contradict Baghdad's lack of any indication that the summit will ask President Bashar al-Assad to step down or transfer power to his deputy. This is interpreted as a reversal of the Arab League's previous resolutions.
We are now completely removed from the Arab League's initiative. We're now talking about the mechanisms with which the Arab League's initiative may be activated.
The absence of the Syrian revolution's most prominent demand is perhaps diverting the attention to another summit, hosted by Turkey for the Friends of Syria. The Syrian people are hoping to find in Istanbul what they did not find in Baghdad. The Baghdad summit may represent the first step on the path to reintegrating Iraq into its Arab environment and beginning a new phase with new Arab leadership. However, it is more essential to implement different policies that respond to the winds of change and the Arab people's aspirations for freedom, democracy, and power rotation. Abdul Fattah Fayed, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said the Syrian president should translate his words into actions and implement the Arab Initiative. In his speech at the Baghdad summit, Ban stated the Syrian government has failed to protect its people.
The government has failed to protect the people
and to fulfill its responsibility. Instead, it has subjected citizens in several cities to military assault and disproportionate use of force. As you know, the Syrian government has written to the Joint Special Envoy, Mr. Kofi Annan, accepting his 6-point plan, which was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. I share Mr. Annan's view that this is an important initial step that could bring an end to the violence and the bloodshed, provide aid to those people who are suffering, and create an environment conducive to a political dialogue that would fulfill the long-held legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. It is essential that President Assad put these commitments into immediate effect. The world is waiting for commitments to be translated into action. The key here is implementation. There is no time to waste.
Arab leaders have held their annual summit in Baghdad amid tight security. They voiced solidarity with the Palestinian cause and supported a peaceful solution to the unrest in Syria. But absent from their discussions, the ongoing revolutions in Bahrain and Yemen.
The summit kicked off with support for the Palestinians suffering under continuous Israeli assaults and blockade. Arab leaders also backed efforts to reconcile Palestinian factions and encourage a national unity government. Iraq's President Jalal Talabani called on Arab states to unanimously support the Palestinian cause. The acting Palestinian Authority chief urged the Arab League to put Jerusalem al-Quds at the heart of its agenda and break the Israeli siege of the Holy City. Abbas also accused Israeli leaders of ethnic cleansing by demolishing Palestinian homes in al-Quds and revoking passports. He once again ruled out direct talks with Israel as long as Tel Aviv continues its illegal settlement construction and expansion on occupied lands. The meeting also expressed support for the UN Arab League envoy's plan for Syria and called on Damascus to fully implement Kofi Annan's initiative. The leaders also said they favored a political solution to the unrest through national dialogue and rejected any foreign intervention. They called for talks between the Syrian government and opposition based on the UN Arab League peace plan to end the year-long unrest that has claimed thousands of lives. Thursday's meeting was held amid signs of division among Arab states. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who've been seeking military intervention to topple the Syrian president, sent a low-level delegation to Baghdad. The Arab leaders also kept silent on the year-long revolution in Bahrain that's been calling for the downfall of the al-Khalifa regime. This despite the ongoing brutality by Saudi-backed forces that's led to dozens of deaths and hundreds of arrests in the kingdom. The revolution in Yemen was also ignored while people are demanding the trial of the former dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh and his aides for killing protesters. The U.S., along with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, are accused of trying to keep Yemen's powerful military under the control of Saleh's relatives to hijack the revolution. Many analysts see the Arab League's visible double standards and its inactivity over major Arab issues, including Palestine, as an indication it's no longer considered a relevant body to resolve core Arab issues.
Rights activists from all over the world have gathered in the Lebanese capital Beirut to join Friday's global march to Jerusalem al-Quds. They met at the city's media council to show their determination for taking part in the rally. Among the participants were several anti-Zionist rabbis opposed to Israel's aggressive policies in the occupied territories. Press TV sat down with some of the activists.
We believe that the state of Israel, the existence of the state of Israel, the name Zionism is forbidden according to Jewish law. So we are happy to be on the other side to participate in the global march to Jerusalem. We want to see Jerusalem should be the capital of Palestine.
I was here once 40 years ago, and I visited the refugee camps at that time. And still, 40 years later, the Palestinians are still living in exile, in misery and terrible conditions because of the occupation of their homeland.
The activists plan to hold a Land Day rally near Lebanon's southern border. The day commemorates the Israeli military's deadly attack on Palestinians peacefully protesting Tel Aviv's land policies in 1976. A recent Gallup poll shows 8 in 10 Egyptians oppose U.S. economic aid to their country. Similar research has revealed anti-U.S. sentiment in Egyptian society marked an upward trend since Gallup began the survey in April 2011. The recent public debate about U.S. influence over Egyptian foreign and domestic policy has strengthened anti-U.S. opposition in the country. The murky circumstances and arrangements that resulted in the prosecution, travel limitations, and then a sudden departure of U.S. citizens facing trial in Egypt has also inflamed Egyptians' sense of distrust and suspicion regarding what U.S. funds mean for Egyptian sovereignty.
Hundreds of Bahrainis gathered outside the offices of the United Nations in the capital Al-Manama to protest against the regime's use of poisonous gas against demonstrators. Other areas in Bahrain also witnessed anti-regime protests demanding the ouster of the Saudi occupation. The International Labour Organization demanded the Manama authorities present their final report on the case of workers sacked for protesting.
Their slogans reveal more persistence than ever, and throughout their continuous protests in the country, Bahrainis are demanding political reforms. Here in the village of Abu Saiba, protesters chanted in solidarity with prisoners held before the revolution, especially with their own Ali Abdul Imam, and demanded their immediate release. In the city of Kharzakan, they demanded that the murderers be held accountable, especially King Hamad bin Isa al-Khalifa. Under these banners, families from the island of Sitra participated in a demonstration to condemn the arrest of opposition figures, notably activist Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja, who has been on a hunger strike for 50 consecutive days. Protesters called on other countries to intervene on behalf of al-Khawaja and other prisoners. Here in Bani Jamra, protesters chanted for the withdrawal of the Saudi occupation and condemned the repressive acts protesters are subjected to. Regime forces responded to the protests with tear gas and live ammunition. They also besieged many of the villages that witnessed demonstrations. They quickly raided cities, especially al-Bilad al-Qadim and the area of al-Sahel al-Janubiyya and al-Shamaliyya. They stormed homes and arrested a number of people, most of them participants in the actions. The families of Bani Jamra stood up against the regime's forces as they raided the city with the support of the Saudi occupiers' armored vehicles. As a result, violent clashes broke out near Duwar al-Fakhari. The ongoing violence in Bahrain pushed the International Labour Organization to demand the Bahraini regime to present its final report on the case of the workers sacked for protesting. In a hearing held by the organization's board of directors and attended by Bahraini Minister of Labour, Jamil Mohammed Ali Hamidan, the board called on the Manama authorities to speed up the presentation of their final report. In addition, the organization called on the regime to present the details of the reinstatement of the sacked workers to their workplaces.
There is enough evidence to indict Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, as cited by UN Human Rights Commissioner Navi Pillay. Pillay said the acts of violence committed by security forces must have received the approval or involved complicity at the highest level, and they could end by an order from al-Assad. The UN Commissioner also accused Syrian forces of committing acts she described as horrendous, such as opening fire at children and denying them medical treatment. Meanwhile, the Syrian armed forces continued their military campaigns across several Syrian cities, killing 21 people. Most of the victims were killed in clashes between the regime's forces and army defectors. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said fierce clashes have been raging since yesterday in the countryside of Hama, killing 4 civilians, 5 defectors, and 4 regime soldiers in the area of Khalat al-Madik. In addition, dozens of regime soldiers were injured in the clashes. Luay Gabra has more details.
This is Syria, where today is not much different than yesterday, and where the sound of gunfire is echoing louder than the voices of protests. There also, the news of killing, shelling, and displacement is continuing to dominate the scene. This comes as the scene of armed confrontations between regime forces and army defectors is continuing to expand. In the countryside of Hama, military and security operations are raging amid fierce clashes that claimed several lives. This news came as reports confirmed the deaths of 2 regime soldiers in an attack on their military truck. In the area of Katlat al-Madik and surrounding villages, many homes were looted and set on fire amid heavy gunfire. In Green Idlib, as it's known, the squares were turned into battlefields amid the sounds of powerful explosions and heavy gunfire. Today, military forces stormed several villages in the eastern countryside of Marat al-Naman, killing several citizens. Meanwhile, clashes erupted in the countryside of Damascus. Also, fierce confrontations broke out between regime forces and defected armed groups in Wadi Kak and Kafir Amr in the area of al-Zabadani. A powerful explosion was heard in the city of Harasta, and columns of smoke were seen raging near an army checkpoint. To the south of Damascus, fierce confrontations erupted near al-Diwar al-Jadid in the city of Da'el in Daraa province, injuring 8 regime soldiers and destroying an armored troop carrier as regime forces continue to impose a tight siege on several neighboring villages. Images and news, which are made available on opposition websites and the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, seem to offer a painful glimpse of the daily Syrian life.
The Sudanese army celebrated the withdrawal of South Sudan soldiers from the border region of Heglig after days of clashes. The celebrations came shortly before the meeting between political leaders of the governments of Sudan and South Sudan in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa to discuss security issues between the two countries. It is expected for the recent developments to dominate the talks.
After several days of clashes, the Sudanese army celebrated the withdrawal of South Sudan soldiers from the disputed border region of Heglig. Sudanese officials confirmed they fully secured Heglig, which is surrounded by a number of oil wells and located 15 kilometers from South Sudan.
Our forces are now securing the Sudanese border 36 kilometers from this area. As the whole world can see, Heglig is secure, and in turn, the areas around Heglig are also secure. The armed forces have taken the initiative. They're ready to fend off anyone who thinks they can launch an aggression on this vital and crucial region for Sudan.
Several days ago, Juba declared its control over Heglig. However, Khartoum confirmed it regained control of the area soon after. For 3 days, the Sudanese Air Force continuously launched airstrikes on al-Wahda state of South Sudan. Khartoum then said it never launched any strikes on the territories of South Sudan. The two countries held each other responsible for starting the attacks amid a military escalation. This caused tension between the two countries that had witnessed a civil war that lasted more than 20 years. The international community considered the clashes to be a dangerous escalation that may lead to a new war between the two sides.
The members of the Security Council are deeply alarmed by the military clashes in the region bordering Sudan and South Sudan, which threatens to precipitate a resumption of the conflict between the two countries, worsen the humanitarian situation, and lead to further civilian casualties. The members of the Security Council call upon the governments of Sudan and South Sudan to exercise maximum restraint and sustain purposeful dialogue in order to address peacefully the issues that are fueling the mistrust between the two countries.
These clashes came shortly before today's meeting between Sudan and South Sudan's government in Addis Ababa to discuss security issues. It's likely for the clashes to dominate the meeting that was scheduled before the battles erupted. Some fear the meeting will hit a dead end due to the confrontations. Maha Sukar, BBC.
Demonstrators and security forces were both preparing for the so-called global march to Jerusalem, set to take place tomorrow when Palestinians commemorate Land Day. Public Security Minister Yitzhak Aharonovich said that the police force is poised to deal with any disturbances that may erupt. He added that the officers have been instructed to respond quickly and forcefully to all attempts of violence and disorder. Sources in the security force today said that although protest marches will take place in Lebanon, Jordan, and in the West Bank and Gaza, there is no sign that there will be attempts to try and breach the borders into Israel. IDF forces have been placed on high alert on all the borders, as well as in Judea and Samaria.
The government of Azerbaijan today denied reports that it has granted Israel access to use several of its air bases for potential military strikes against nuclear sites in Iran. A report published in this week's Foreign Policy magazine carried an interview with 3 senior American officials who claim that Israel has arranged to use 4 airfields in Azerbaijan. Access to the abandoned Soviet-era bases in Azerbaijan, which borders Iran, would enable IDF jets to reach the hardline Islamic Republic without refueling during an airstrike against its nuclear facilities. According to the sources, Washington is concerned that the recent deepening of relations between Iran and Azerbaijan would actually increase the likelihood of such an airstrike. Jerusalem and Baku signed a bilateral $1.6 billion arms deal just last month. Israeli officials declined to comment on the report.
Several dozen settlers entered a home adjacent to the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron early this morning, claiming to have documents proving they purchased the empty building some 4 months ago. The IDF declared the area a closed military zone and opened an investigation into the ownership of the home. Military sources called the move an irresponsible provocation that may inflame spirits ahead of Land Day. Settlers have reportedly been purchasing homes and land in Hebron for several years, though many of the purchases have been legally contested. The Palestinian owner of the house was reportedly taken in by the Palestinian police for questioning.
The Jerusalem District Court today issued an indictment against 18-year-old Mohammed Shuaman, who was arrested after stabbing IDF soldier Yehudit Aharon on Jerusalem's light rail 2 weeks ago. Shuaman, a resident of the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Beit Hanina, was charged with attempted murder, possession of a knife, and obstruction of justice. The suspect allegedly carried out the attack because of what he described as frustration with the Israeli treatment of Palestinians. Shuaman fled the scene after stabbing the female soldier several times. He was arrested later at the Kalandia checkpoint.
Six Beitar Jerusalem soccer fans, including 5 minors, were today brought to the Jerusalem Magistrates Court for an extension of their remand. Some 10 more fans have been detained and released to house arrest until the end of next week. All of the men are suspected of involvement in last week's racist riot at the Jerusalem Malcha Mall, which broke out following a soccer match. The Beitar fans are suspected of shouting out offensive racist comments at Arab workers at the mall. Police officials said dozens more are expected to be arrested for the outbursts. Meanwhile, it was announced today that Mohamed Merah, the 23-year-old gunman who killed 7 people, including the 4 killed in last week's shooting in Toulouse, will be buried in a Muslim cemetery in France within the next 24 hours. Merah was shot by French security forces during a siege at his home last week. His father wanted him buried in a family plot in Algeria, but Abdallah Zekri of the French Muslim Council said Algerian authorities refused to approve the request for what they cited as security concerns.
Al-Ahly ultras continued their sit-in in front of the Egyptian People's Assembly, demanding the urgent prosecution of the perpetrators of the Port Said incidents. They also demanded the eradication of corruption in various ministries, in particular the Interior Ministry, and for the government not to interfere in sports.
Their love for al-Ahly brought them together, and the martyrs' blood unified them. They demand fair retribution for the killing of over 70 martyrs. In front of the People's Assembly, the al-Ahly ultras sit-in continued for a 4th day, demanding the arrest and prosecution of the criminals responsible for the Port Said Stadium incidents.
It was caught on video. The entire world saw them killing the people in the stadium. Why is it becoming such a big deal to call for retribution? They attacked us and ordered us to end our sit-in. As you can see, the sit-in is peaceful. This is our 4th day. The indicted security leaders are living lavishly while the martyrs' families are sleeping on the street to demand justice for their children. At the same time, those who plotted the deaths of Egyptian youths are still working at the police academy and having fun.
The penalty imposed by the Egyptian Football Association on al-Ahly and al-Masri clubs was not the reason for the sit-in, the ultras seeing it as an insignificant reason to rally. This was their answer to the purpose of the sit-in. They stressed the rally is to demand the rights of the martyrs, cleanse the Interior Ministry, seek fair trials, and get the Parliament to declare its position on the revolution.
The sit-in has nothing to do with the penalty imposed on al-Mazrui. This is an insignificant reason to hold a sit-in. Our great demand, and the most important demand, is for the martyrs' rights and to complete the revolution. We want them to deal with our demands in a fair and objective manner. Again, we demand justice for the martyrs, the completion of the revolution, and the cleansing of the Interior Ministry, as well as fair trials. I will not escalate the situation until I see how they will react to our demands. Our demands are legitimate and objective. We have the legitimate right to make demands.
The day I stopped cheering is the day I die, and those who have stopped cheering did so because they died. But their colleagues are continuing until they attain the martyrs' rights, eliminate corruption in many ministries, and guarantee that the government will not interfere in the affairs of the sport. Abdullah Barakat, Nile TV.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.